Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, Measuring the Value in Gen AI Projects. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate that you're here. We know you have a lot going on. I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Dan Gron, and he is going to dazzle you with ROI in Gen AI. All right, we're going to get started in just a second here. But actually, I just have to say I'm really excited for this webinar because I use Gen AI in my job every day, and I would love to know a little bit more about the value. So I'm super excited for this session. And just to tell you a little bit about us, well, first of all, Dan and I would like to welcome you on behalf of Ascendient Learning, part of Accenture. And that part of Accenture is LearnVantage. And with LearnVantage, we can help organizations transform businesses through upskilling and reskilling. And because we are now part of Accenture LearnVantage, we can offer you even more customized learning journeys, consulting, private training, one-on-one mentoring. Also, public courses, of course, are still available, plus latest certifications. But we're still us. We still can give you the same personalized individual training and service that we always have been. And we do love doing that. We also love giving you free events and related courses. So check out our schedule. I can put these in the chat. We've got a couple more free webinars coming up, all having to do with AI, Gen AI. We can also provide any dedicated webinars for your team upon request. So I'll put our contact info into the chat as well. There's some add-on courses here if you're interested in taking some more classes after this webinar. If anything piques your interest, I'll put those in the chat as well, and they will be emailed to you. We can also do dedicated private courses if you request them. And if you get Dan on the phone, he is really great at telling you exactly what you need. If you can, if you just communicate what your challenges are, he can really pinpoint a great training program for you. So speaking of Dr. Dan Gron, he's been working in tech for almost 20 years. He is also a researcher in AI, cybersecurity, and agentic AI, but he also has a ton of practical experience deploying cutting-edge AI solutions. He's won multiple awards in AI and responsible AI, and he really does care about responsible AI and sort of weaves that into a lot of his talks and courses. But what's not on the slide, and what I really want you to know, is that Dan is just such an excellent communicator, and that he's got this talent for breaking down really complex topics and just being able to communicate them to techie and non-techie folks. So you are in for a treat today. Okay, so with that, Dan, I will pass it over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. If it does not show up for you, let me make sure I select the right one. You can click at the top of the Zoom screen. There should be something that says like my screen. Um, I do see a hand up, and I will say if you have any questions, do feel free to drop those in the chat. I am really good at tracking the chat while we go, and I am, yeah, happy to do that. I'll either integrate your question into the presentation or take a moment to stop and answer it. The other thing I wanted to say was happy Juneteenth to everyone. This is not a holiday. It's a US holiday, not one that I grew up celebrating, but I have been making a practice of observing it by thinking about the people who I most other in my life and trying to work to see the inherent dignity in each of them. And I think that would be a good practice for all of us. So I am here to talk about making the case for generative AI projects. And I think that this is an important one because there is a natural pattern or trend to the way technologies progress. This is something that we see time and time again. And I call it the tech bug's life cycle. It starts with a lot of people, typically at conferences, typically business people who don't know as much about the technology as the nerds like myself. No hate on the business people. and they'll say, have you heard about this technology? Have you heard about AI? Have you heard about crypto? Have you heard about finding prime numbers? And it's a question like that they're trying to say like, is this a technology that people are hearing about? What's the buzz? Is it something that's going to emerge? And then after that, it begins to be, are you doing this? Are you doing AI? Are you doing ChatGPT or Gen AI or agentic? As to see who is adopting what. After that, it's what are you doing? So it's not just like, is this something you're integrating? We're doing agentic. It's what are you doing with agentic AI? Followed by how are you doing it? Not just like what, but how are you getting to that what? And then finally, like what are your results? Because at the end of the day, the actual technology that we're using matters less than the results. So if I could say, I'm thinking of like there's the Docker images versus open container OCI images. And does it matter which one you're using? No, the technologies are pretty similar. What matters is that whichever technology you're using, and you're using it in a way that brings results for your group, your business, your organization, um, one of those, or yourself if you're doing this personally. So, in this presentation, what I want to do is I want to lay out a couple of steps that we can take to make the case for AI. We'll also talk specifically about the metrics and the measurables that are um, inherent or unique to generative AI. Give a couple of examples. I'll actually show how some of them are calculated. And at the end, I'll have a time for questions and all of that. So here's our rough flow. We are going to start by defining the problem. Then we're going to align that problem with business goals. You can swap personal goals in there if you want. Define the scope and objectives, and then make your case. So let's begin with defining the problem. Before you are able to like make this case and say this is why we should use AI, you actually need to define what the problem is. And so this is going to be an iterative process where you really nail down to the core problem and then what the impact is. So let's talk about identifying the core need. So the core need here is a very fundamental problem that can be addressed by AI or another technology. And the goal of the core need is to understand what is really like the reason behind the reason behind the reason for a problem or for a challenge that you're facing. So it's important to know this, even if you end up just treating the symptoms. For instance, I know there's a lot of diseases out there. There are some in my family, and there are not cures for them. You can't treat the root cause of the illness itself, but you can treat the symptoms, and that leads to a much better life. So treating symptoms is okay, but you really should understand why you're not treating the underlying cause. Now, this whole concept of identifying this core reason, it ties into root cause analysis as a field. And there is a technique in this called the 5 whys, which I think is a really practical example of how to do this. So the 5 whys technique is simply to ask why 5 times. So for instance, if I had a problem, let's say that our salespeople were unable to respond to emails quickly enough. I might ask, why? And a salesperson would say, well, I get too many emails. I'd say, okay, why are you getting too many emails? And they could say something else. Maybe they're signed up to too many newsletters or they get too many spam messages. And then why, and then why, and then why again. And by the time you hit like that 5th why, you've typically traced back to a very fundamental reason for what's going on, what the problem is, what that core need is. Now, once you have a core need, You want to then articulate what your outcome is, what you want to come out of addressing this need, solving this problem. And I think many people are familiar with SMART criteria, which is specific, measurable, attainable, reasonable, and time bounded. It's nice to keep this in mind, like they're useful, but at this point, when you're like defining an outcome, it's more about, I don't know, qualitative. I was about to say touchy-feely. It's not a, I want to get 20% fewer emails by X date. It's more about, I want fewer emails in salespeople's inboxes, or even better, like I want them to respond to emails faster. Um, One of the key things here is that if you have a good desired outcome, you can articulate clear examples for it. And so here I have a problem, a cause, and an outcome. So problem is that the customer waited 4 days for a response. The cause being that there was a queue of tickets, and as the tickets came in, the queue kept adding higher priority responses, so this person just kept getting bubbled up to the bottom of the queue. Now, the outcome is that you want to respond to all customer requests within 6 hours. Um, Again, that's not like a hard and fast smart metric or smart criteria. It's just a desired outcome. Once you have all of this, it's important to understand who is going to be impacted or who the stakeholders in this solving this need would be. This could include both your internal groups and external groups, IT, salespeople, even just like people who do similar job functions to yourself, or people who use one particular tool. And then once you have like this list of who might be affected, you can kind of prune it down by asking a series of follow-up questions, like, does the stakeholder affect the business's success? So if I was doing this personally, I might have a list of people around me, like, let's say I want to mow my yard more often. I tried to do it this morning and it rained. Um, that would affect myself, how I feel about the yard. It would affect my neighbors, how what they think about my yard. Um, but does their perception of it affect me? A little bit, but I could probably prune them off of that list. Do I know what I want from them? Like, this is if you have a stakeholder, you want to have a relationship where you say, this is kind of the feedback I want, the input, the resources. Once you have that, is it a two-way relationship? You don't want to just give people time or input and get nothing in return. And then this is an interesting one. Could you replace them with a different stakeholder? Because if you can replace them with someone else, that other person might be better. And it also indicates that they might not be a critical stakeholder. So with these, you want to say, yes, they affect the business success. Yes, I know what they want from them. Yes, it's a two-way relationship. And then no, I couldn't easily replace them. So that is what goes into defining the problem. We have a core need. We have a articulation of what we want the outcome to be. And then we have a list of stakeholders. And at this point, we need to move to step two, align with the business goals. And so the business goals here, I like to boil down into four things: to do something better, to do it faster, to do it cheaper, or to make something possible. And I would say like possible is one of those ones that only very rarely comes up. Usually it's better, faster, cheaper. So these are kind of in tension. There's that old adage, you can have something done well, done fast, or done cheap. Pick two. You can't have three. So in other words, you can have something better and faster, but it's going to cost you faster and cheaper, but it's not going to be better. better and cheaper, but it's going to take a long time. And so when you're thinking about initially aligning yourself with business goals, you could think about how is this project going to make things better? How is it going to make them faster? How is it going to be cheaper? Or how is it just going to be possible? So on like a personal side, like if I'm using AI in the course of my everyday work through an interface like ChatGPT, I might say, hey, I'm using this to put together reports on specific topics that people ask about. Like a person has questions about a particular technology and they want to run down the pros and the cons and alternatives. You know, I could go out there and do it myself, but I could get 80% of the way there with a like Gemini, ChatGPT deep research, and then touching it up. So that's something that I can do faster with AI. And then, yeah, better. Certainly, there are cases where AI can make results better. And then 99% of the time, like AI projects are just going to be cheaper because they are often faster and often better than paying someone to produce this high quality product. I would say that like if you're at the very top level of models, like the O1s, O3s of OpenAI, it can get expensive, but for most of us, cheaper is the case. And then possible is, I think, falls into this realm of like, especially automation. What could we automate now that we couldn't automate before because of the complexity of it? So this is kind of the framework that I like to keep in my mind when I go into asking them about business goals, because at the end of the day, they always boil down to better, faster, cheaper, possible. So after this, um, you want to know your business's strategy. This is something that I think a lot of, especially like myself, tech people, we kind of balk at. It's like, ugh, if I just make a better technology, if I just do a better product, it's going to be accepted by the business. Um, and I think like many times that's the case, but if you think about there are 50 different options of ways to improve a business, you have to rack and stack them somewhere. So if you think your project or your approach to something is the best, you want to sell it by making sure that you're looking at your company's mission, visions, kind of those long-term goals, and then saying this project tracks back to those. If it's something like we are delivering, and I keep going back to salespeople, but if we are delivering a really hands-on, personalized experience, then it might be something where you say, we do want our salespeople to respond faster if it's a personalized, hands-on experience. And so that's the way that you're tying it there. You can also look at the business drivers' priorities. Opportunities in the market is a big one. I think one of the ways that we see the market responding to AI is a lot of companies, startups are popping up and they'll say things like, we are the only AI first task management platform. And okay, it's still a task management platform. So there's challenges, opportunities. What are your competitors not doing that you could do? What challenges are they encountering or are you encountering that you could improve upon? And lastly, how success is defined. So if you're measuring success by one outcome, but your manager, director, VP, C-suite board are measuring it in a different outcome, you're not going to get very far. So knowing how that success is defined, asking those questions can be really valuable. Once you know that, though, you do have to check on kind of the resources and culture that are available. If this is like a risky project and your business is very risk adverse, probably not the right one. Find ways to reduce the risk. If you're proposing this big overarching overhaul of a system to make it integrated, built from the ground up with AI in mind, but you don't have a whole lot of resources, again, probably not the best. So this is a challenge of finding the right, um, how do I put this? The right interplay of risk resources. So once we kind of have a idea of the problem, what we want out of it, who's going to be involved, we know that it is aligning well with the business strategy, and we can kind of make that case just for that business strategy. It is time to move on to defining the scope and objectives of this. And I actually see that now my slide did not update there. There's the check the resources and culture. Sorry that didn't come up. And here is define the scope and objectives. Let me fix that. So what we've done so far here? We talked about defining that problem. We talked about the desired outcome, who's going to be impacted with it, and we did that alignment and assessed resources and culture. Now we needed to get kind of to the brass tacks of what we're talking about today. Metrics, return on investment, all of those wonderful, joyous things. So the next step is to decide on your key performance indicators. Now, these are going to be measurable values that demonstrate the effectiveness of the project. If you come from the AI world, like me, you hear these things and you think metrics. And these metrics are often things like accuracy, precision, recall, F1 score. And they always trace back to like some fundamental aspect of the AI, where the higher that number goes, the better the AI is. But that is not always, it doesn't always make sense to your stakeholders. It's not a good way to say this project is being effective. And if you're at a point where you have to say, hey, we spent $10,000 getting 1% more accurate, someone says, why does that matter? So when you think about your KPIs, you want them to be able to track your progress towards your outcome. You want to make sure that they are also tracking like alignment to that business strategy. They should really be actionable. So if someone looks at it, they know something, they can assign more resources. They can say, oh, this is not going well. And it should really track the right things. So an example here, and we'll have a lot later. If I was going back to that sales example where people are taking too long to respond to emails, I wouldn't necessarily track the number of emails that each salesperson received, although certainly that would be a useful thing to know from like a data science and analysis perspective. What I would actually want to track is how long did it take them to respond to each email, or maybe to resolve an email where it's either marked as spam, deleted, archived, or just or responded to. And that's something where, hey, it's aligned with the strategy, hands-on with the customers, responsive to them. Our desired outcome is, that they are responsive so that it tracks to that. And it's actionable because if you see that metric going down, like your people are quicker to respond, quicker to deal with emails, that could be a positive outcome. If the number is going up, 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 and it's taking a week to respond to an email, that could be a negative outcome. So that is like tracking the right things. There definitely in that example, there's some room for gaming the system. There's some room for it being maybe not the best metric to track, but again, just an example. One tip here, look for some KPIs that are already being tracked and see if any of those would be impacted by your project, your AI project, and you see if you can just pull those up and say, hey, we're going to use this one. It's already being tracked. We're good to go with it. Now, once you have KPIs, you want to establish a baseline. And I think this is This is something that could be really important for individual use of AI as well as kind of a organizational use of AI if you're deploying an AI system. So going back to that example of me generating kind of research reports, I would want to do something where I take a stopwatch, click it, set it down, start researching a topic, write down, the report, send it off, pick it up again, and click. Um, and that would be a time that took me to do the report, to from start to finish, soup to nuts, report done. Once I had that, and I would want to run that again and again and again, maybe 5 times, I would have a good idea of this is how long it takes me to do these reports. And that's a really important point because if you don't know how long something is taking you or what the starting point for the KPI is, you won't know if you're improving on it. I think we often see this. You kind of like, hey, we're going to implement this system, and it's implemented, and you don't know what the outcome was. We switched from Jira to Asana. Is it better? It was cheaper in the IT budget, but is it making the overall workflow of the company better? Don't know. Now, when you have baselines, you can either collect them yourself. You can also look to kind of historical metrics. So the example I gave was the something that I would collect myself. And there's a couple of different ways to collect them. You can do some surveys. You can look at system logs. So you might be able to go back and say, hey, from the time I received that email for the report, told Dave I was working on it, and then actually sent it to him, how long was in between there? And, I might know if I got distracted, and this might not be the best thing, but if you think about system logs for the responses of emails to salespeople, you can go through those, you can go through them real quick and get a response for how fast are the salespeople responding to emails. You can also just use user feedback. How well are people happy with, how well are they happy? And as well, you can also interview people. So call them up on the phone, send them, ask them over chat, just to say, hey, how is this working for you? So those are some good ways to establish those baselines. Once you have them, um, you need to define some objectives. And this is where we get into like the smart stuff. Definitely use a framework. I'm not the biggest fan of smart. I won't go into the details. I prefer this fast one because I think it gives you it's not, I think it's easier. I like it better. I won't go down that rabbit trail. The way that one works is you pick something that's frequently discussed. You make sure that your task for it is ambitious so that you're not something menial. And my Google Home just restarted. But you pick something that's not menial, something very specific. So that's where kind of that specific of smart comes in. And then something that's transparent. So not just you can see it, you know how to track it, but also someone who's holding you accountable could see and have insight into it and track it as well. I much prefer those. But yeah, all of these are valid. Grow is a good one. Whoop is just fun to say. So yeah, go out and search, not too hard. Now, you have your objectives, you have your baselines, your metrics, and this is where we move from step 3, those scope and objectives, to step 4, which is making your case. And don't worry about metrics. We are going to circle back to that. None of what you do prior matters if you can't make the case for this project. I think it's just unfortunate that sometimes people who are better presenters and better writers get things over the people who have the best technical solution. I can tell you this is the case because I have worked for companies where I won contracts where I thought other companies could do better, and we won them because, we wrote a better proposal. Um, so actually take some time. If you know you're not great in public speaking and you have to present in public, practice it. Actually take the time to go through that. Everyone hates it. If you have information about all the information in the past, use it to create kind of a story structure, a narrative around your project, and really do emphasize the value of it. So rather than give some tips for effective communication, I want to do 6 tips or 6 ways communication can actually break down. Number one, overuse of specialized jargon. If you are using your terminology and not your prover's terminology, then they're going to shut down. In-group language is an effective way to build affinity with people. An example of this, if you ever saw the movie Top Gun, you have Tom Cruise. I forget his name in it. Someone's going to put it in there. You have Goose, and they're all sitting in this hangar at these little desks that are too small for them, and the female character whose name escapes me walks up, and they all kind of sneer at her because sexism in the 70s, and they don't think that she is this expert on fighter jets until she starts talking in their language and has all of those different terms at the tip of her tongue. That actually has research behind it. You can go look that using the same language as the people you're trying to talk to makes things better. Second is mismatched expectations. So stakeholders think one thing, you think another thing. This is just miscommunication. It happens, but working to make those things clearer, breaking down complex topics, setting clear objectives, that can help with it. Third is information overload. Don't put too many charts in there. Don't put too many words. Otherwise, what you want them to hear will be lost by just reading the slides, which I will admit I'm guilty of on some of these. Second one, if you're not communicating enough or fast enough, there's breakdown. It can lead to mistrust, confusion of what's going on. People can feel like they're left out of the decision process. Furthermore, lack of transparency, like just outright not being realistic, promising the moon and delivering Florida, any sort of ethical breaches, they happen. And last one is just differences in communicating styles. We're all different people. Learn how the people that you are making your case to communicate and how they prefer to receive their communication, whether it's written, email, Teams. Great example here, just one of the tips I will throw in. Use something called a bottom line up front. This comes from the military, where you put as the summary, the TLDR at the very top of your message, along with the actionable information, whatever you want them to do. So you say, um, our salespeople are taking too long to respond to emails, leading to a lack of customer satisfaction. This is a result of XYZ. We would like to take this action to remediate this. We need your approval to do X. It will cost Y. Example of and then go into the details below that. That way, right off the bat, a person has the context for what they're doing in that email or presentation, whatever. Now, I will tell you that you can communicate better through one quick trick, and I have a video for this, which I have not done on a webinar before. And I will just play this video real quick.
Scientists just reverse engineered the formula for Roman concrete, and it is way better than the modern stuff. While today's concrete can degrade in as little as 50 years, plenty of Roman structures that were built thousands of years ago are still going strong. A few years ago, we learned that mixing concrete with seawater instead of fresh water was part of the Roman secret. But a 2023 study found that wasn't the only trick up their sleeves. They had sleeves, which they didn't because they had togas. The Roman concrete recipe calls for a mineral called quicklime. When mixed with seawater, quicklime produces a hot chemical reaction and leaves chunks of undissolved lime throughout the mixture. This produces concrete that can repair itself. When it cracks, rainwater leaks in and hits those lime chunks, which reactivates the cement and fills the gaps as they form. In 2021, cement production accounted for 8% of greenhouse gas emissions, so a self-healing concrete could help us cut emissions by eliminating the need to repave stuff all the time. Scientists just reversed.
So, my tip is watch Science Communicators. That's Hank Green. He's been around a while, is on the SciShow channel. I'll drop a whole bunch of examples in the chat here. Feel free to save them. But you saw what he did. He said right off the bat, we figured out this Roman concrete stuff and it makes concrete better. And then explains uh, all our concrete stuff falls apart, but the Romans have been around for years. Why? Recipe, and kind of goes progressively into details and later turns it around again to finish with why it matters. So, right off the bat, you knew what was happening. You got more and more details and finished up with a kind of a nice conclusion for it. The examples that I sent are all great ones, except I meant to take out that Nile red one because I didn't mean to put that in there. It's still fun to watch. Um, they are very, very good. Like science communicators practice this. They're experts at breaking down these technical concepts, and whatever you can learn from them is really just going to be a good way to learn. So, with that in mind, we have our 4 steps, and I want to do a deep dive into generative AI metrics. So, I'm going to break these down into some categories. I'm going to explain them in as simple terms as I can, give some examples, not for all of them. But first, I want to talk about one of the most different things about generative AI metrics over all other metrics that are out there, and that is LLM as a judge. This is a method for evaluating or creating generative AI metrics that uses generative AI to create those metrics. And initially, if you come from the traditional predictive AI world, the kind of very hard, concrete, algorithmic metrics world, then this feels squishy and qualitative and like a terrible idea. But it works pretty simply. You take what you want to measure, you break it down into a set of steps, like as discrete as you can, and then you find a way to have the LLM do each of those steps one by one to make it, if you're doing those steps one by one, it's better than just giving something a score. An example here is a toxicity score. I pulled this from Deep Eval, which is a great library to go to. And this, in an output, you find the total number of opinions and divide it by the number of toxic opinions. And I'm going to go an example for this. So let me switch over to my chat here. And I'm going to pull up the exact prompt that Deep Eval uses. And I will give a bit of a note that it does have an example of like some hatred here. This is not an endorsement. It is just the prompt that was used. So we have our here, and right here, we would kind of put the text of the output. So we have Sarah always meant well, but you couldn't help but sigh when she volunteered for a project. That's kind of a condescending tone there. I'm going to add something to this. Something like, I also think cake pops are bad. So I'm going to send this in, and it's going to run through, and out here, it's going to give me two opinions. I have, you couldn't help but sigh when she volunteered for a project, and I also think cake pops are bad. I'm going to save this just into my clipboard, and I'm going to copy now in a second prompt. And this time, this prompt, and I know I'm going fast, this prompt is asking about each of those opinions, and it's going to ask, are they an example of personal attacks, mockery, hate, dismissive statements, etc.? And then they're going to ask for like a verdict, yes or no. This is a toxic comment, and then a reason behind it. So let me copy in my opinions about Sarah and cake pops, and we'll drop this in here. And like, these are things that are easily programmable. And then once I run this, we should get yes. My first opinion is toxic. It's dismissive and borderline mocking towards Sarah. Aw, poor Sarah. And the second one about cake pops is no, it's not toxic. Unless perhaps, whoops, unless perhaps I had just said to someone, I really like cake pops, and they said cake pops are bad. Okay. So here we can calculate the toxicity. We have two opinions. One of them is toxic, one of them is not. So we have 1 divided by 2, which gives us 50%. And this feels reliable. If you do it at scale, the model is going to be right most of the time. So that is the like LLM as a judge, an important concept. So let's talk about the categories. Rough breakdown, we have first like conversational metrics, then ones that relate to knowledge or specifically like RAG, retrieval augmented generation. And then we're going to talk about safety, some agentic metrics, and then others. So conversational metrics. Here are some of the top ones. We have things like logical coherence. So this is just the ability to carry on a conversation without suddenly talking about squirrels and marmots and other things like that. Any inconsistencies or contradictions in the statement, you don't want the model saying that they love cake pops and 2 seconds later that they hate cake pops. The second is role adherence. So this is an interesting one. It's where the model is actually going to keep talking as if it's an assistant and not suddenly something else. Helpfulness, so just generally how useful was the AI to the user, how well it retained knowledge about the conversation. So if you told it you lived in Michigan, but you later it asked, where do you live? Then it didn't retain the knowledge. Conversation completeness. So this is actually the successful completion of whatever the user needed. And then the relevancy is just how well it stays on topic. So an example here, and this says tier 1 support, but let's go back to that sales agent, where we need them to respond to customers more quickly. We could look through someone's email, look through. We could use an AI to go through someone's email and track helpfulness, conversation completeness, the relevancy, which might be a little bit difficult. Salespeople do talk about other things, people's kids, and so on and so forth. We could track some of these things just by testing human conversations. And let's say then that we put in an AI agent that was just there to help the salespeople generate responses or in some way. We could track those same metrics, see if the conversation was completing, if they were helpful, based upon the agent's responses. So here, like a tier 1 support, you're going to take all your humans to tier 2 and up and have tier 1 entirely by AI agents. You would want to test all of these things, the completion rate. So this is just the number of % of successful interactions, the escalation rate, the percent of interactions that required human intervention, and that average response time before you would track that before you implemented the AI agents. But these are things that apply to humans too. And all of these apply to humans as well. Our second set of metrics, again, if you have questions, drop them in the chat. Oh, Daryl says social science, human behavior interactions with some scientific logic. Yeah, pretty much. There, especially when you talk about breaking down these metrics, like defining what toxic is or completeness is, you use a lot of language that people do in scientific literature to kind of define these things, or have previously used to produce metrics. So you're not reinventing the wheel. It's a good place to start. Knowledge ones are just about how the AI uses information. So if you haven't used RAG before or haven't implemented it, retrieval augmented generation is where you put a query into an AI system and it is going to retrieve some information and give it to the LLM so that the LLM can answer based upon relevant information. And here we have very similar metrics to like the conversation, such as the completeness of an answer. Like if a user asked 5 questions, did you answer all 5 of them? As well as like correctness, that was a correct answer, that was a relevant answer. And then these are more about the RAG system itself and whether you're retrieving results that are relevant, you're only retrieving I had that backwards. You're only retrieving relevant results. Recall is you're retrieving as many of the relevant results as possible. And yes, the relevancy of retrieved information to the query. This is like, are you only getting the like specific relevant information? So if you transition this to like an HR chat, you could definitely have like an answer relevancy rate. So were the answers that were given by the HR bot relevant? You could also say, were they correct? If you have a low correctness rate, you have HR problems. And then completion rate, like, did people get successful answers? Were they pleased with the outcomes? Again, these are things you could pull from emails, you could track before you switched to an AI system. This is also something you could track for yourself if you cared about, producing those reports. Maybe you might say, how much positive praise did I get? Like, did someone say this report was excellent? And so on and so forth. So you can imagine tracking these things. I am going to quickly talk about safety metrics. I won't linger on these because of kind of the inherent nature of them. Feel free to drop off for a minute if you want, because we're going to talk about some of the specific details, and these are relevant when you are fielding generative AI systems. So we have bias and toxicity. So this is any sort of discriminatory or toxic language. Ungrounded attributes. So this is where you infer an attribute about someone that isn't clearly stated. So you might say that someone is from a particular country when they are not. There's also any sexual content, violent content, self-harm content, copyrighted protected material, and then you get into like prompt injections and vulnerabilities, kind of the more attacking ones. And I really like this example here. Like, let's imagine that you are putting out an AI tutoring system for teens. We know places like Khan Academy are doing this. You might have not just like metrics, but actual alerts if there's any sexual, violent, or self-harm content. But then you might get into the questions of like, what if it's a health class? What if they're asking about specifically topics? Like, is going to be tricky to do. And then correctness relevance again. And maybe in a coding class, you're adding in the code vulnerability rate. And this is in addition to all of those previous ones. And then these are, very business relevant. You want to take care of kids. You don't want to hurt them. You want to make sure that you're giving the correct answers and educating them, and so on and so forth. And then let's talk real quick about agentic metrics. These are ones that are specific to agentic AI, and agentic AI, I think about this as um, an agent operating in an environment like a workplace, using a set of tools with a broad goal or a specific goal, and using those tools to complete that goal. It is not just like a chatbot providing information, it is taking action in an environment. So here we have things like task completion. Did they complete the task? How long, maybe, or how efficient was the completion of the task? And did they only complete that task? Or did they go off and do something else as well? And here you might think of like an agent which schedules meetings for salespeople, kind of like a very specific personal assistant. And you could look at, with this AI agent, how many meetings were scheduled successfully, how many messages had to go back and forth before a meeting was scheduled, and was the meeting scheduled with everyone who should have been in the meeting. So these are all kind of specific metrics, and I'm kind of taking these, I should have said this earlier, I'm kind of taking the table on the right and pulling it into a specific context. Last category here, the other, these are things like whether it's following instructions, how well can it summarize things, can it have a specific style and tone, like if you were going to use marketing. And my personal favorite is the custom metrics, because this is where the LLM as a judge gets really cool. There are two frameworks for this, GEval and DAG. There are other ones, but they are not as easily accessible in frameworks. And this is two ways of defining custom metrics using very simple plain text, like hooking into that LLM as a judge. So GEval, you just say, here is my metric, and here's how you evaluate it. So the EG there is the spiciness of a generated recipe. And this could be, hey, we want medium spice recipes. And so here's how you measure the spiciness of a recipe. You break down the recipe into the set of ingredients. You look at how much of each ingredient is added relative to each other. If there is a lot of dairy added, which would counteract capsicum or capsaicin, the spicy molecule, then you like kind of offset that, and you give a set of steps of like how a human might evaluate the spiciness of a recipe. And then you define how you want the output. You say something like answer on a scale of 1 to 5, and you let it do it. And it just does it. It does take some prompt engineering. It's not perfect. But then like once you have your prompt, just leave it there. And if you ever change it, you kind of have to reevaluate everything. But this allows you to get some very use case specific metrics without doing too much. The other one is using a directed acyclic graph. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. You can look it up on Wikipedia. It's a computer science and graph theory thing. But this, you just break down this is an example of it on the right. You break down the metric into a series of steps. So this says, hey, I want to extract headings in an actual output, and then does the summary headings contain all three intro, body, conclusion? If it does not, you get a score of 0. If it does, you ask if they're in the right order, and then depending on how many are in order, you get another score. That is useful if you already have some specific scoring metrics, like they've been written out. Maybe you need people to produce the score of a report or an interaction or a proposal. And then it's also very useful if you want finer control than GEval. Last metric thing. This is one of my personal favorite, not quite hidden secrets, and that is cost effectiveness. This is the way you can compare lots of different things. And it's used by um, healthcare and health insurance companies to evaluate different treatments. And you say something like, hey, what is the cost of an intervention divided by the value of that intervention? So if we say, hey, we could intervene in a population by giving annual blood pressure checks to everyone. What is the cost of that divided by the value of it? And measuring those is tricky, but there's a cost and a value. And you might measure the value in something called quality adjusted life years, which is, again, a healthcare metric. And then you might say, actually, then what is the cost of not giving those and maybe just targeting a high risk population for high blood pressure for those check-ins? And then what is the value in that same cost adjusted life years? Those two things would be difficult to compare otherwise, but then once you put it into that framework, you get a single number that where you see one of them makes that cost go a lot farther. You can also directly compare two of these things if you have a control. So you say, what's the cost of the intervention minus the cost of doing nothing, or the cost of whatever your other option is, and divide it by the differences in the values. And that's something called an incremental cost effectiveness ratio, called an ICER. Super awesome. And again, cost doesn't have to be financial. Neither does value. It can be any sort of time, resources, metrics you want to track. But this really puts it down into like just some raw numbers, some easy way to compare multiple options in the same space. And when you are looking at metrics, a few things to consider. Oh, I hit the wrong way. Make sure your metrics align with business goals. Make sure the metrics are transparent and well-defined. Make sure that everyone understands those definitions and where to find them. Make sure you can measure reliably. LLM as a judge is good. It is not perfect. It's kind of the best we have. Make sure that you are tracking enough things to get a reasonably complete picture of the system, and make sure the metrics are really easy to understand and communicate. So at the end of the day, kind of here's our framework. You want to define the problem. You want to make sure that you're aligning it with your business again, or your personal goals. Think through the scope of your projects and your objectives. Be specific with those objectives. Use a framework. And once you have your KPIs, get your baseline, make sure it's well tested, and then make your case. Make your case either personally or to yourself, to your team, to your organization, and use some effective communication. Like if you can make a compelling case to yourself, then you can probably make a compelling case to other people as well. So that is what I have for today. I have really been looking forward to this presentation. I think it's super cool content. I am happy to answer whatever questions you have. I'll stick around as long as you want. But thank you for attending. Don't feel like you have to stick around. Have a good Juneteenth. So yeah. Hey, Ann.
Yay. Hey, just wanted to say thank you to you, Dan. That's great insights and tidbits. Love the swapping out smart for possibly woot. I am also staunchly in favor of cake pops. But tons of great tips, and thank you for another wonderful webinar. We all really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us. I did throw some links in the chat. Some of the Gen AI courses, then any of them can be customized. So you can take a look at them there. Oh, you're getting lots of great praise. Thanks everyone. Yay, great session, great webinar.
If I can make an appeal here, if
Yeah.
you were looking for something with a high return on investment, I did have like a spreadsheet that I didn't get to. I talked too long. Something with a high return on investment, we just have a model context protocol class go out. This is one of the technologies that is much easier to implement than people think and ends up with some really impactful results. So,
Dan, can I show it? I can bring it
yeah,
up. I've got
absolutely.
the page. Okay. I guess I'm going ahead and replace the current share. All right, let's see. Oops, there's my email. Can you all see my screen now? Generative AI training. Do you see that, Dan? Okay, awesome. So yeah, this is one of the links that I put in the chat. And if you scroll down here, you can see all of our different topics under Gen AI. And the new class that Dan was talking about is building agentic AI with model context protocol. This is the course right here. I can also throw that in the chat as well if it's easier for you to find. So anyway, yeah, here are all the details, and you can go down to look at the entire syllabus. And this course, as all of our other ones, can be tailored to the needs of your organization or your team. Great. All right, let's see. Just any last questions coming in? Oh, Daryl, we will be sending you the recording of this. So this whole thing's been recorded. We'll have it on YouTube. We'll have it on our site, and we'll send you the link. You're welcome.
I will take that as everybody just wants to enjoy the holiday.
Yeah, and you did such a good job of explaining everything. We're just absorbing, and maybe if you think of questions later, here in the chat, I've got a webinar survey. We do read them all, take them to heart. If you have a few moments, we've got the link in there, and our info, these pages. We'll also email you with this recording and all of the other Gen AI webinars coming up, because Dan is doing a few of them. So you'll get to see him again. Yay. Oh yeah, I know. I want to start doing it now too, Mike. I'm gonna get cracking on
Don't go
that.
willy-nilly. Like, actually think about setting some metrics for yourself to make sure it's of value. Because I definitely find myself trying to make AI work on things, and I could have just done it myself.
That's true. Very good. All right. Well, all right. We've got like 3 after the top of the hour, so I guess we'll release everybody out into the world and start creating your metrics and KPIs. And we'll see you in the next webinar, hopefully. Okay, everybody, thank you so much. Bye, all. See you soon.